All right, hey folks, welcome to Sig-Testing. Yeah. I think we're filling in names of attendees and whatnot, but just to start off, welcome. And if there's anybody here who is new and wants to unmute and give a brief introduction of like what they're here for and anything you want to accomplish, or like just want to give details about yourself, please feel free to.
It's Guy speaking. I'm new here. I'm from Red Hat, so this is my first time joining the meeting. I'm pretty interested in in this pro community. So just try to sit and listen and to see what we're discussing.
Sounds great. Welcome.
Thank
you.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Matteo.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Matteo. I work at Datadog. I'm joining for the first time this SIG meeting because we've been using the end-to-end framework for a while. We like it a lot, but I raised an issue to the agenda, and I'd like to know how to address or how to start discussing a possible fix with the community. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you as well. Welcome.
So, hey, my name is Michael McHugh. I go by Elmiko online. I also work for Red Hat. This is not my first meeting, but since there's a completely new set of people here, I figured I'd introduce myself again. I am currently tilting at the windmill of trying to make generic CCM tests that we can put into KK. And so I'm here to get some ideas.
Sounds great. Welcome as well.
Hi, I'm Maureen. This is my first time joining this meeting. I currently contribute to SigDocs, and I decided to just join here and see if there are any opportunities for me to start contributing to SIG testing as well.
Excellent. Welcome. All right, last call for, is there anybody else who would like to do intros? All right, looks like it's good. So yeah, thanks everybody. And again, if there's anything to follow up with, just in case we either don't get to it in this meeting or so we have a more permanent record, please feel free to ping on the Slack channel as well, especially for following up for any tips on good first issues or help wanted or stuff like that. Yeah. I interrupted the agenda with a quick welcome discussion, and then we'll get to the stuff that everybody put on the agenda. But just first up, I wanted to say, everybody, please welcome the newest SIG testing chair, Brady Pratt. He's doing an excellent job so far, acting as basically a chair already. So now we're making it official, and there should be some PRs coming down the pipeline to get all of that settled this week. But in the meanwhile, yeah, officially accepted via the normal process, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michelle. You've been awesome throughout this.
You have as well. So thank you for all the work so far, and looking forward to working with you in the future. All right. With that, I think we can kick it over to everybody who brought up agenda items. So first, please correct me if I pronounce this wrong. Rajas?
Yep, I can go. So hi, everyone. So this is about, as the title suggests, like adding comments and annotations from prow jobs to GitHub pull requests. I can put the issue link over here. It's there in the design doc as well. I was hoping Patrick to join, but anyway, just to give context on what this is about. Essentially, there's this issue wherein we want to, there was this request to have warnings, errors, annotations coming from prow jobs to be added to pull requests as comments, right? And the doc that I've written is more in terms of the Golang strict CI linter that Patrick has been working on, which and there's a proud job for it. It's all linked in that doc, but the job is not functional as of now. And to make that, I mean, when I say functional, it's not being used. Then to make it working and to make it to readily use that, this is another feature sort of being proposed, wherein it'd be kind of good to have proud jobs basically posting errors, warnings, annotations back to GitHub pull requests as comments. Cryo already has a GitHub reporter to reflect the status on pull requests, and this would basically be enhancing that. I mean, taking it to the next level by adding comments and annotations. But then there are some design things to be considered over here. How do we want to store that artifact? How do you want to store those comments? One way is to store those comments or store whatever needs to go as a comment as a file, preferably maybe Markdown or something of that sort. And in this particular case, with contents of the Golang CI linter. That's one of the solutions. So I'm kind of hoping that I can get some review on this, and also looking for some sort of an approve. So Ben posted on that issue that instead of going through like a full-fledged KEP, we can go through like a lightweight design review, like a design doc, which can then get approved by PRAO approvers. And then maybe we can start with the implementation. So this is my first attempt at like breaking it up to Sig testing. And I'm hoping to get some eyes on this, and then kind of planning on sending it out on the Sig testing mailing list and following up over there. But it'd be cool if folks can review this. Are there any questions, concerns, comments?
Looks like not a lot of comments at the moment, but I think I agree that like having the design doc here and having it pass along to some of the folks who would have good comments sounds great. I saw Patrick already replied on the doc, but I'll also try and pass this along to pro folks inside Google, and I think Sig testing list is also great for anybody else as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Really appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. So this will be up for review, and then yeah, if there's no more comments about if there's any more comments about this, please feel free to do so now. Otherwise, we'll just move on to the next item. All right, sounds good. Next one is Mike, I think.
Yep, Mike or Elmiko is fine. So I put together a little document here just to describe some of the background. I see Patrick and someone else has already made some comments, but basically there are a bunch of tests that we were running with cloud controller managers. And now that we're getting closer and closer to having all the cloud controllers out of the Kubernetes tree and run as external controllers, one of the things that I've been looking at, and I think Sig Cloud Provider is interested in, is creating like a generic set of tests that we could have live in KK, and then we could have specific cloud providers kind of participate in those tests or not. And this is like an issue that's been around for several years now. I have a link in the document to an issue that Timothy St. Clair opened up back in 2018 about making the tests more generic and getting rid of the cloud provider specific code. So for the last couple of months, I've been going through the tests and trying to build like a proof of concept for how we do this. And during that work, I also talked with some people from Sig Storage and some people from Sig Testing to get ideas about how to do this. And so I'm kind of curious, my current ideas are to create like kind of a new set of tests inspired by some of the tests we have now, to create like a configuration file format that's similar to the way Sig Storage does its CSI testing. And for those who haven't seen it, the CSI tests are a generic set of tests that live within the KK repo, but each individual CSI provider can create a configuration file in their repository that says which capabilities they'll have in their CSI driver. And then that informs the testing infrastructure about which tests to run for that driver. Another idea I've also had is to or I've been discussing with people, is to create an interface that would live inside the KK repo and specifically in the cloud provider testing area, so that individual providers could participate in that interface to provide, really like provider specific functionality. And what I mean by this is, like, for example, the ability to delete a node, because that's something that one of the controller loops we want to test is like the node lifecycle controller inside the cloud controller. And so every cloud is going to have a different way to delete a specific node. And then also, having some sort of selective compilation that takes place from the testing that we do from our continuous infrastructure. So with that as kind of a little setup, I have some questions that I'm trying to work through, and I was hoping that bringing them here might help push this on a little further. So the first question I had was, does the current CI testing workflow allow for like this conditional builds, which would change depending on which infrastructure they're being run on? And I do see that Patrick has responded that he doesn't think it's currently being done, but doesn't think it would be impossible. I haven't read through all these comments because I just saw them now, but I'm kind of curious if anybody has thoughts about that, or if maybe I should not go down that path or something, or what. And I will take silence as an approval to continue going. So
I don't have too much thoughts on it. It sounds like a really good plan to proceed forward with. I mean, I don't think it's difficult for us to do as far as conditionally switching based on what platform is being tested. I feel like while it may not be done or standardized, it has to be implemented in some fashion currently, or I feel like it has to be being used in some way currently, because we have tests that are infrastructure platform specific. Even like what you're saying with Sig Storage, like that would be a great, I guess what you're going off was a great example of how we would do that. Yeah, I think this is really cool, and I definitely want to talk to you about participating in this because it sounds like a fun project. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I got some more questions then to follow up with here. And I guess just to kind of dive into that one a little bit more though, like currently in our tests, we have skips depending on which provider it's being run on. It is the CI system that's run by the Kubernetes community. How do we choose which platform it runs on between like AWS, Azure, GKE? Is that something that's decided in a centralized location, or are those tests run by each of the various providers?
I figure, well, I don't know specifically, and I don't want to give you like a solid answer. It's just going to be defined in whatever we have the proud job set up to be. So if someone's running against GKE clusters, which I guess we're doing now, or running those on and provisioning those, then it may be locked to that. I actually don't know much about how the provisioners work as far as like when we spit out a cluster then to then be tested against. That would be a good question. Yeah, I figure it's going to be defined within the proud config.
That is also my guess, is basically the proud job config is going to be the part defining it, unless somebody has like, again, I'm not familiar enough with like exactly what all people are doing in the wide range of it. It's possible somebody is doing like a wild setup that like dynamically chooses things and then we'll route to a different one. But as far as like the proud job config and whatnot, I'm guessing it's defined on the cluster that the config runs on. And then if there's anything else that it deals with, then that's dealt with within the parameters of the like job. Might not be in the proud job config depending on what it's doing. Like Bosco's resources, for instance, I think are going to be handled by like whatever the thing is running Bosco's.
And for what it's worth, Omiko, that's how I do the testing that we're doing for OSD in Red Hat. is that when I'm wanting to test against RO, then I'm provisioning an RO cluster and I'm specifically passing labels to select those tests. So I assume that that degree of control is there right now. It may just not be as standardized, like this is how we need to do it. But like you're saying, as long as we have those skip labels in a way to know that what we're running against, then this shouldn't be too difficult. I hope that makes some sense or helps a little bit.
I think that also makes sense with the thing I briefly saw on the storage CSI stuff, which is that they have something generating crowd job definitions, which I think to me makes sense for like having a variety of things to stand up.
Yeah, this all makes sense. And I think that's a great suggestion to look again at the SIG storage stuff and how it's configured specifically. Because like this is going to be dependent, for the next questions I ask, which is basically, one of the kind of the leading idea I have right now for how we can do provider specific behavior is for us to implement an interface in the KK testing suite and then allow each provider to implement that interface in their own like cloud provider repo, right? But that brings up, kind of the question of, should we do it that way? Because that means that when you're building the tests, you'll have to either import from outside, the struct, you'll have to import based on what you're running on, or alternatively, you'll have to build the tests from the cloud provider repo and then run them that way. And I'm not really sure, what would be the best way to do this. I saw a comment came up here in the, in the questions or in my open questions. It says, I don't think EDE tests should continue to import the cloud provider at all, nor should we stage the EDE framework. So I'm a little curious, like what does Sig-Testing think in terms of if we're building the tests from KK and we know we're running on a specific platform, should we do a conditional import based on the cloud provider that you're building for? Or would this be better to say, okay, if you're running these tests on a specific platform, on platform X, then when you get to the cloud provider test, what you need to do is build the test from the cloud provider repo, including the tests from the KK repo. So I'm not sure like what the best way is, or maybe using an interface is not the best way to go about it. So I'm curious what you all might think.
I'd love to hear some of the others' thoughts who may not have that much experience with it, but I really do like the idea of having a contract, I guess, per se, with the interface that these providers need to implement across, because that's pretty much what it is, right? Enforcing it at a type level would be very beneficial. But like you're saying, we do get in like a chicken and the egg situation where we either have to import it this way or import it this way, then we're back to importing cloud providers, or we have to do some strange building, which the second option didn't sound as bad as importing. I think pushing those dependencies as far as importing cloud providers kind of puts us back into the same boat, in my opinion. Yeah, I guess that's all I got. And sorry, I feel like you may get a lot more responses going through Slack from talking to Ben or talking to Paul or Patrick more. There may be some help there.
No, I mean, I appreciate the discussion. At this point, I'm trying to gather kind of a better view of things because, what I would like to do is draft off of previous decisions that we've made that we like in the community. So really, I'm just trying to get everyone's feeling for this. I mean, it sounds like making an interface is good, but probably the best way to test these things then is to actually test them from the cloud provider repo so that we're not having to import from, KK or whatever.
I'm also kind of wondering, like, I guess two things. One, this brings to mind the conformance tests, which I think are probably in a different area of like purpose and whatnot. So maybe not directly related. The other thing I can think of is just I guess I'm curious who should be responsible for ensuring that like a cloud provider like has an implementation, if at all, and then possibly also who is running or who is responsible for making sure that those run and against what. Like I'm actually not sure right now exactly where these either gate or inform things. I guess that's That's my thought. I would like to know more about that before having a couple more formed opinions. I also agree that following up in Slack, I think would be a good idea because I suspect this is going to be a longer term discussion given the scope of this, but agree it's neat.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a longer term discussion too. Like, and I I think I'm working towards building a cap around this so that we can have a better understanding of how exactly it's built. But to push that along, what I'm going to try to do is build a proof of concept that we could start like, batting around and kind of arguing about or whatever. So really all these thoughts are great for me. This is helping me kind of push it along. I think looking into the conformance test is actually a really great idea too. That's something I'll definitely do.
Going back to your question on conditional build on like a specific infrastructure platform, I wonder if looking at how Cluster API does it for like different providers may also help over here. I'm not sure, but just a thought because they extensively use Boscos for like AWS, Azure, GCP, things like that. So that would be, and as far as I know, there is a different E2E test framework there, which is built on top of Ginkgo for Cluster API. But from an infrastructure cloud provider perspective, it may help. I'm not sure. Like, just wanted to point that out as well.
No, that's a great suggestion as well. And I actually do participate with the Cluster API community, so I'm familiar with their tests. And yes, they have a common test suite that lives in the Cluster API directory, and then the individual providers, kind of build from that. I think one of the big differences there is that most of their testing is done through the interface, the API that they've created, whereas the tests that we're going to be doing here, like for example, the node lifecycle test, we need to have an interface that each provider can implement to like kind of, destroy nodes or create nodes. And similarly with like the service load balancer tests, right? Like I've identified a couple service tests that like probably could be used generically. But then we have other tests where, like, for example, on GKE, you need to do specific annotation and cleanup after creating like a static load balancer. And there might be situations where we want to check to say, okay, if you've asked for a service load balancer type and the cloud provider creates, elastic load balancers, did an elastic load balancer actually get created in the infrastructure or whatever? So like that, it's something that's like kind of a difficult problem that I think lies just between what Cluster API does and like what we're trying to do in the KK test. Because, in Cluster API, you can say like, well, make me a bunch of machines through the machine deployment. And then you can just look to see, did those machines get created? And the cloud provider handles everything about doing that. But that is another good suggestion. So let me see. I think I had one more question here. Okay, so another point that came up in the issue that I linked inside the documentation here, or from KK, is that there is functionality that only some cloud providers have and other cloud providers don't. And this may be things like creating certain types of load balancers or having certain types of termination signals that come back from nodes. And so there are tests that I think we have currently that might kind of border on some of this functionality, and we want to remove those functions from the KK tests. And I'm wondering, would those be best to implement in like a third location? Like we have the Kubernetes cloud provider repo, which is like a sample repository for other providers to build their cloud providers from. And I'm wondering, would it make sense to move some of these like more specific tests into that location so that we could have the individual cloud providers kind of participating in that repository for a common set of tests that would be a little bit more specific than the tests that run out of KK? Or is there maybe a better way to do this? Should we just say that each cloud provider should have a suite of their own tests or whatever? This is kind of like where I think Sig cloud provider will get involved to help promote whatever activity we decide to choose. But I'm just trying to understand maybe, from your all perspective, like what would be the most best solution we could come up with here?
Yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think is my actual answer. I'm very interested in what like Patrick or Antonio have to say. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was probably one of the more subtle points that came from the discussion thread from a few years ago, because like the people who were participating in the thread at that point were having trouble kind of coming up with scenarios where this happens. But I know that it will happen, because like, for example, there's, we're seeing a problem with a test that we had to remove recently because AWS, wanted a very specific set of annotations to make some sort of behavior happen. And that behavior was different than the other clouds we're testing. So I have a feeling this is one of those things that's I think it's going to be a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I think my instinct is that this is probably tied to who's responsible for making sure that the EDE tests for like specific cloud providers and whatnot get run. So I think that will also influence whether like specific features, especially like depending on how specific they are or not, also need to get should be tested in like a main thing or a side repo, or like not at all, and then just in like whatever the cloud providers have separately. It's a good question.
Yeah,
Cool.
and I think you've probably done way more research on this than I have, but everything you're saying, it really sounds like there has to be parallels to something like what Sig Storage did with CSI, like you pointed out. Like there has to be parallels there as far as kind of how they handled this. And like we talked about earlier, it may not have been a standard like best practice, but at least getting some of those ideas of how they did it would be really good. And I have no idea. But yeah, I think you're on a great track so far.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think like Raja said before, like, looking at the cluster API stuff, I think the CSI tests are very similar to that. Like the real big difference between the CSI tests and what we want to do with the CCM tests is that the CSI tests can all be manipulated through Kubernetes objects, right? So like whenever they want to test, they're just creating persistent volumes, making sure they can write to them, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas with the CCM tests, like from what I've seen so far, like although there is a subset of functionality that can be exercised just by creating kube objects, like you say, did it make a service load balancer? Okay, great. Did the node get marked with some sort of zonal information or regional information? Okay, great. Like those are real, like simple tests we could do. But if we want to really replicate some of the deeper functionality, there has to be this interface layer where the individual cloud provider could provide some of the functionality. And that's really where it differs from like the CSI testing and the cluster API testing. So that's why I'm kind of, I wouldn't say struggling, but I'm kind of like running into a wall in terms of like, okay, what's the best way to go forward with this? I really appreciate the discussion here, though. I've got some notes on my document, and I think this gives me at least some ideas of where to go next and kind of what to try out. So, happy for any more comments, but I'm cool if we want to move on to the next topic.
All right, looks like we're good on comments. Thanks again for bringing this up, and thanks for all the discussion, everyone. I think we've got one more item on the agenda, so Matteo, take it away.
Yes, thank you. So we are using the end-to-end framework to run like some sort of, end-to-end test before giving the clusters to our users. And considering that we have a different amount of controllers and things, we wanted to execute those tests in parallel as fast as possible. So the idea is we create a namespace, we do our own test inside the namespace, and we delete it. And we started using a couple of helper functions from the framework before each test, after each test, but we found like some random issue and error. And so running them with a race flag in Go test was bringing up that there is a race condition. And I think because in the framework, there is a test end object that is the test environment object that has a context. And so when we run multiple tests in parallel, I believe that we are trying to write back from parallel things to the same context, and then we overwrite the value. I raised an issue where I was able, at the beginning, I thought it was like our testing, and then was able to get to the bare minimum repro with the framework itself. I also raised the PR, but either I fixed the race condition, but then we are losing the ability to use the context to pass value between the steps of the framework, or I keep the values, the nice circle of the value, but I still have the race condition. So at this point, I don't know what is the best approach. If other people have ideas, everyone here came with a document. I don't have any document prepared with the suggestions. So I basically am I'm happy to work and to push this forward, but I would like some guidance about what is the best way to do with the, building consensus with the community and to propose a thing that makes people happy to use it rather than, oh, this, I think we should do this, let's do it. And I push just the code. So
Yeah, I can take this one. So I will say we are quite small as far as contributors in N10 framework. There's a handful of us. We appreciate anybody who can jump in and help. And obviously this fix is great. So thank you for that. It does look like you're on the right track as far as passing context through. There may still be a copy in here that you're doing that may be giving us an issue. That copy may be causing the problem as far as the race condition. I want to investigate a bit more to try to understand the issue. But this does look like the right direction. And if you're ever not getting like traction on one of these PRs, just please feel free to ping in Slack. You can tag, you can tag Vlad, you can tag some of the others that you see as far as contributors, and we'll try to take a look at it. Yeah, we're still trying to build a table around this as far as reviewers. So.
It's not a problem. I have some more experienced Go colleagues that they are a little, I would say, skeptical around using the context to pass things around. So they told me, well, we should probably don't do that. And I said, hey, I can go to the community and say, people suggested me to not do that, but it's a pretty big change compared to what the framework is. So again, before pushing a bunch of code, removing the context, and someone says, well, why are you doing that? Here I am talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think it'd be best if we kind of go through Slack and talk on this.
Okay.
Because Vladimir's not here, and I think he'd be one of the best to discuss with. And I'll try to take a closer look at this. I meant to this morning, but didn't have a chance. Yeah, thank you for the fix, though.
No worries. I'm happy to ping you then and Vlad, and we can start a Slack thread, and you can tell me where do we want to go next, and I'm happy to do my best there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Any last minute things that folks want to add on? Rahul?
Hey folks, Rahul here. I've been working with Kubernetes for over a year and a half now, and like over the past few weeks, I've been trying to use kubetest2 to run conformance testing, end-to-end testing, and all. I've been facing a few issues, so I thought like maybe I'll get those things like sorted, and I also came to understand that Kubernetes is always open for contributors. So if you folks can help me out with any issue or any means that I can help you out with, like how Brady put out right now, it'll be really helpful. And yeah. Excited to be part of this.
Yeah, glad to have you. I think in terms of probably starting to sound like a broken record a bit, but like definitely follow up on the Slack for any like specific questions or things like that. I don't know currently who's like an expert for kubetest2 stuff, for instance. I suspect it's not that many people, but at least Slack should have a good chance of being able to point people towards it if you do have anything specific.
Great. And to what extent are we working on Sonoboy? As in like, is Sig-Testing also involved in Sonoboy's development?
That is a good question. I may want to ping Ben about that. I do not personally know. Does anybody else? Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if Sig-Testing is participating in Sonobui, but I was under the impression that Sonobui started as a Heptio project and then was owned eventually by VMware maybe, and now is part of the CNCF. So I thought
Yeah,
Sonobui
that's right.
I thought Sonobui was one layer up from like some
Right.
test too. Yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it might
so
be worth
the
to reach out in the Sonobui repo or look for issues there, because I have a feeling they're working at one layer above where Sig-Testing is working at, but I don't know for sure on that.
right. Yeah. I did take that course. Like, so I tried running things through Tube Test 2, and then I realized, hey, there's an abstraction to this. Then I started working on Sonoboy, but I didn't get much response from the said channel. So thought I'll flag it here so that if folks here have some context, they'll be able to help me out. But yeah, thanks for the
Well,
link.
Rahul, I just know, for example, like we have a tool at Red Hat that we use Sonobui for to run the kube end-to-end tests. So I know like Sonobui is a great wrapper for running the end-to-end tests, but I'm not sure that there's much, I'm not sure that there's much relationship downward from the Sonobui tests into the end-to-end testing. I think it's more the other way around, where the end-to-end tests are a base layer, and then Sonobui can ingest them to run them in specific ways. So if you have a cluster, you can use Sonobui to automate the running of the end-to-end tests so that you could then later see if it, passes conformance or something like that. And that's the way we're using it inside Red Hat. But from what I've seen from our usage of it, I think the relationship is more of Sonobui is downstream from the end-to-end test suites that come out of KK. But that's just my impression as a user of Sonobui.
Got it. Yeah.
I think that's my impression as well. The last mention I know of Sonobui in terms of stuff I've seen is like, I believe it's used for the conformance testing, but that again is like kind of a different bag in terms of like ownership or responsibility. So
Okay, so which would be the right avenue for me to, or which would be the right door for me to go knock to get the
I think pinging on Sig-Testing just to make sure like exactly what the responsibility there is good. I suspect I think are not responsible for like Sonobui directly. I think we are just a user, but that's a good one to get confirmed. And then yeah, I think that is also the correct channel to ask about anything Cube Test 2 related.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like any guidance on easy issues that I can pick up, or any issues that where help would be needed, I'd be happy to start out with.
Yeah. The test info repo should have some help wanted or good first issue things marked. I think we can always add additional ones, but like that should be a good start. I'm sure some other related areas also have those.
Great. Thank you. This is helpful.
Yeah. All right. I think with that, we come to the end of the agenda. So yeah, I think we can call it good. Thanks everybody again for joining. Good to have a lively Sig-Testing discussion as always. And yeah, hope to see you around soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Right.
Cat.
Thank you, everyone.